Pick the weakest man in the room, the hostage-taker said, his voice low and jagged. And sometimes you pick the only one who knows exactly how this ends. The first thing Claire Bennett noticed was not the gun. It was the silence after it appeared. 1 second the little bank in Cedar Ridge, Colorado was filled with the ordinary sounds of a Thursday morning. Printer hum, keyboard clicks, the soft shuffle of winter boots across tile. And the next, every breath in the room seemed to freeze in place. A woman near the teller counter dropped her pen. A child began to cry. Somewhere in the back, a coffee cup tipped over and rolled in a slow circle across the floor. Claire stood 3 people back from the service desk, one gloved hand still wrapped around a manila folder, her heart knocking hard enough to make her vision sharpen. The front doors had already been locked. Phones were sliding across the marble floor into a black duffel bag. The man with the gun was pacing in front of the lobby windows, shoulders twitching beneath a dark jacket, eyes moving too fast, voice trying too hard to sound in control. "Nobody be a hero," he snapped. "Nobody talk unless I ask you to." That was when Claire saw him. He was standing near the far wall with a little girl tucked close to his side, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder as if he could steady the whole room by steadying her. Mid-40s maybe. Flannel shirt beneath a worn canvas jacket. Work boots. A tired face, roughened by weather and long days. The kind of man most people would glance past without remembering. But there was something about the way he stood that made Claire look twice. He was not rigid. He was not panicked. He was calm in a way that did not belong in a room like this. His eyes moved once to the front door, once to the side office, once to the security mirror in the corner, then back to the little girl. "Hey," he whispered to her, crouching just enough to meet her eyes. "Keep looking at me, Lily. Not him. Just me." The girl nodded, clutching the sleeve of his jacket with both hands. The hostage-taker turned and scanned the room like he was shopping for fear. His gaze skipped over the older man, the crying woman, the security guard flat on the tile. Then it landed on Ethan Cole, on the father in flannel, on the man holding a little girl and looking exactly like someone life had already worn down. "You," the hostage-taker barked, jabbing a finger across the room. "Single dad. Bring the kid to the corner and step forward." The room went still in a different way then. Claire felt it before she understood it, like the air had changed shape. Ethan did not argue. He knelt, brushed a strand of hair from Lily's cheek, and said something too soft for anyone else to hear. Then he stood, handed her a small stuffed rabbit from his coat pocket, and walked toward the center of the bank with the quiet, steady pace of a man approaching bad weather he had seen before. The hostage-taker smiled like he had chosen the safest hostage in the room. Claire watched Ethan stop beneath the cold fluorescent lights, shoulders loose, expression unreadable, and for the first time since the doors locked, she had the strangest thought of all. The wrong man had just been chosen. The barrel of the gun never touched Ethan Cole, but it did not need to. The threat was already hanging in the air like winter static, sharp and invisible, crawling across every inch of the bank lobby. Lily stood frozen near the corner where he had left her, both hands wrapped around the stuffed rabbit from his coat pocket, her little face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. Ethan gave her one last look, the kind only a father could give, steady enough to say "I am still here" without using a single word. Then he turned back toward the center of the room and let the silence settle around him like an old uniform he had sworn never to wear again. "Hands where I can see them," the hostage-taker snapped. Ethan lifted them slowly, palms open, his expression blank in the way Claire was beginning to understand was not weakness at all. It was control. He moved with the careful obedience of a man trying not to make things worse, but Claire noticed what no one else seemed to notice. His eyes were working, not darting in panic, not begging for mercy, but measuring. The security mirror in the upper corner, the distance between, the service desk and the side office, the elderly man slumped by the brochure rack, the young teller trying not to cry, the line of sight from the front windows. He was reading the room the way other people read road signs. "On your knees," the man barked. Ethan lowered himself without protest. The tile was cold enough to bite through denim, but his shoulders stayed loose, his breathing even. Claire gripped her folder tighter, trying to ignore the pulse hammering in her throat. She had spent her career reading people in conference rooms, court offices, and polished downtown firms. Fear had 1,000 faces. So did arrogance. But this man in flannel was something else entirely. He looked like a father worried about his daughter. He looked like a mechanic dragged into the wrong building on the wrong morning. And yet there was a stillness in him that felt trained, deliberate, almost surgical. The hostage-taker stepped closer, circling Ethan with the swagger of someone enjoying borrowed power. "You got military in you?" he asked with a crooked grin, as if the question were only a joke. Ethan kept his eyes lowered. "No," he said quietly. "Just one word. Flat. Respectful. Almost forgettable." But Claire saw the smallest thing then. So small she might have missed it if she had blinked. At the sound of the question, Ethan's jaw tightened for half a second. Not from fear. From memory. Outside, faint and distant, came the first rising wail of sirens climbing through Cedar Ridge. Around the room, shoulders tensed. Someone began to sob under their breath. The hostage-taker cursed and strode toward the windows, shouting at everyone to stay down. And while every other person in that bank flinched at the sound of approaching police, Ethan Cole finally looked up. Not at the gunman. Not at the doors. At the reflection in the security mirror. Claire followed his gaze and felt a chill move through her that had nothing to do with the Colorado cold. It lasted less than a second, that look in his eyes, but it changed everything. Because it was not the look of a hostage waiting to be saved. It was the look of a man calculating how to save everyone else. Claire Bennett had always believed panic made people louder. In courtrooms, in boardrooms, in emergency meetings where men with expensive watches lost millions before lunch, fear usually announced itself with raised voices and reckless decisions. But inside the Cedar Ridge Community Bank, panic had gone quiet. It trembled in shallow breathing. It hid in clasped hands and wet eyes and the sharp chemical smell of spilled coffee drying on tile. Claire was on the floor now beside an overturned chair, her cream wool coat twisted beneath her knees. The manila folder still clutched against her chest like paper could stop disaster. She had come in that morning to finalize the transfer of a scholarship trust created in her late father's name. Something routine, something decent, something that was supposed to take 20 minutes before she drove back to Denver. Instead, she was kneeling 10 feet from a hostage-taker and watching a stranger in work boots behave less like a frightened father than a man standing inside an equation only he could solve. Ethan remained on his knees near the center of the lobby, hands visible, shoulders relaxed, his head slightly bowed in a posture that looked submissive until Claire noticed the precision in it. He was not shrinking. He was listening. To the sirens outside. To the gunman's pacing. To the frightened rustle of the customers pressed against the wall. Most of all, Claire realized he was listening to his daughter. Lily had gone silent in the corner, hugging the stuffed rabbit so tightly its ears bent sideways. Every few seconds, Ethan glanced at her, just enough to anchor her without drawing attention. It was such a small thing, almost invisible, but it worked. The little girl kept breathing because her father kept looking. "Everybody stays down," the hostage-taker shouted, yanking the blinds half closed with one hand. "If the cops come in here, stupid, that is on them." His voice cracked on the last word. Claire noticed that too. He was losing control around the edges, trying to sound bigger than the room felt. Ethan noticed it as well. Claire could see it in the slight tilt of his head, the way a mechanic listens to an engine and hears the part about to fail. Then the elderly man by the brochure rack gave a weak cough and slumped harder against the wall. He had been pale from the beginning, one hand pressed to the center of his chest, but now his face had gone the color of candle wax. "Sir," Claire whispered before she could stop herself. The hostage-taker wheeled toward her. "I said no talking." Claire froze. Across the room, Ethan lifted his eyes just enough to take in the old man, then the distance to the water cooler, then the hostage-taker's grip, then Claire. It all happened in a breath. "He needs water," Ethan said quietly. No challenge in his voice. No heroics. Just calm. Or he is going to pass out on your floor. The room stilled. Even the gunman hesitated, as if he had not expected the kneeling father to sound so reasonable. Claire looked at Ethan then, really looked at him, and understood something she had not wanted to name. Men under real fear either begged, froze, or exploded. Ethan Cole did none of the three. He was doing something far more dangerous. He was earning the trust of the most unstable man in the room. The hostage-taker stared at Ethan for a long second, like he was trying to decide whether kindness was a trick. Outside, the sirens had stopped moving. They were no longer distant. They were here now, somewhere beyond the frosted glass and snow-dusted parking lot. waiting in that tense stillness law enforcement always brought with them. Inside the bank, every person in the room seemed to hold the same breath. The old man by the brochure rack gave another weak cough, his hand trembling against his chest. Ethan did not move. He stayed on his knees beneath the fluorescent lights, hands open, voice level, the picture of a tired single father trying to keep an already bad morning from becoming worse. "He is not a threat to you," Ethan said quietly. "He is 70 if he is a day. Let me get him water." The gunman shifted his weight. Claire saw the hesitation ripple across his face before he covered it with anger. "Why would I trust you?" he snapped. Ethan lowered his eyes again, as if the question itself did not offend him. "Because I have a little girl in the corner," he said. "And because I know you do not want a dead man in here while the police are listening." It was the kind of answer that did not challenge a desperate man. It handed him a reason to say yes without losing face. Claire felt it the moment the room did. The pressure changed. The hostage-taker exhaled hard through his nose and jerked his chin toward the water cooler near the side desk. Slowly, he warned. Ethan rose in one smooth motion, careful and unhurried. And for the first time, Claire saw his full height under the hanging bank lights. He still looked ordinary. Still looked like a man who fixed broken furnaces and carried groceries with one hand while his daughter held the other. But ordinary men did not move like that. Ordinary men did not stand up from a tile floor with their balance already set, their shoulders loose, their eyes taking in exits, blind spots, distances, and reflections without ever appearing to look. Ethan crossed to the cooler, filled a paper cup, and crouched beside the old man with the kind of gentleness that belonged in a hospital room or a church pew, not in the middle of a hostage scene. "Small sips," he murmured. "You are all right." The old man nodded, fingers shaking. Across the room, Lily was still hugging the stuffed rabbit, but her breathing had steadied. Claire noticed Ethan had positioned himself exactly halfway between the old man and his daughter, close enough to reach either one, far enough not to alarm the gunman. It was not luck. It was geometry. The hostage-taker paced again, muttering under his breath, his nerves fraying a little more with every passing second. Then his phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He flinched so sharply that half the room recoiled with him. He yanked it out, stared at the screen, and his face changed. Not rage. Not relief. Fear. Deep, sudden, unmistakable fear. He turned away from the hostages and answered in a harsh whisper, shoulders hunched, one hand dragging through his hair. Claire could not hear the words, but she did not need to. Whatever voice was on the other end had just made a desperate man more dangerous. Ethan looked up from the old man and saw it too. His expression did not change, but something colder entered his eyes, something focused and old and very far from helpless. And when the gunman ended the call and spun back toward the room, he was no longer looking for money. He was looking for a way out. The call changed everything. Claire could see it in the way the hostage-taker's hand trembled after he shoved the phone back into his pocket, in the way his eyes no longer swept the room for control, but for escape. He moved faster now, more erratic, pacing between the teller counter and the locked front doors like a man trying to outrun a clock only he could hear. The old man by the brochure rack was sipping water with both hands. Lily was still in the corner, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes never leaving her father. And Ethan, somehow, had become the stillest thing in the bank. He stayed crouched beside the older man for one more second, watching the gunman through the reflection in the glass of a framed mortgage poster on the wall. Then he rose slowly, not enough to provoke, just enough to remain useful. "You need everybody calm," he said, voice low, almost practical. "If you want to walk out of here, panic is not going to help you." The gunman swung toward him. "I did not ask for advice." Ethan gave a small nod, as if accepting a correction from a frustrated customer. "Then ask for something else," he said. "But the man by the door is having chest pain, and the kid in the red coat is about 30 seconds from screaming. You have got too many moving parts already." Claire stared at him. He was not pleading. He was managing, not just the room, but the man holding it hostage. Every sentence Ethan spoke was built like a handrail, something the gunman could grab without realizing he was being guided. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Claire saw the hostage-taker listen. Really listen. "You talk like a cop," he muttered. Ethan shook his head once. "No," he said. "I talk like a dad who wants everybody to go home." It should have sounded ordinary. Instead, it landed in the room with strange weight. Claire looked at his hands then, broad and rough from work, but scarred in a way that did not come from furnaces or ductwork alone. A pale line, near the wrist, another along the knuckle. Old marks, neat and faded, the kind left by a life that had required more than overtime and hard winters. Outside, a distorted voice crackled over a police loudspeaker, too muffled through the walls to make out the words. The gunman flinched again and barked at everyone to stay down. In the movement, his jacket shifted just enough for Ethan's gaze to drop to the man's waistband, then the duffel bag, then the side office door, then back to Lily. Claire caught the sequence and felt a cold understanding settle over her. He was building a map, not in panic, in layers. Then the bank manager, a thin woman in her 60s, let out a soft sob from behind the counter. "Please," she whispered, "please do not hurt anyone." The gunman wheeled toward her, his temper snapping tighter. Ethan stepped half a pace forward before he could stop himself. It was small, almost invisible, but Claire saw it. So did the hostage-taker. "Stay where you are," he warned. Ethan froze instantly, hands open again, face blank, every trace of urgency gone. But the damage had been done. The gunman stared at him with new suspicion, like a man finally realizing the quietest person in the room might also be the one thing he did not understand. And when his eyes dropped to Ethan's forearm, where the sleeve had pulled back just enough to reveal the edge of an old military tattoo, Claire knew the room had shifted again. The hostage-taker's eyes locked on the faded ink just above Ethan's wrist, and for the first time since he stormed the bank, real uncertainty crossed his face. It was only a sliver of a tattoo, half hidden by the flannel sleeve that had slipped back when Ethan moved, but it was enough to change the air. "What is that?" the man demanded, taking one cautious step back instead of forward. Ethan glanced down at his arm as if he had forgotten the mark was there. Then he tugged the sleeve back into place with the same tired calm he had used all morning. "Old mistake," he said. Claire almost laughed at the absurdity of that answer if fear had not been sitting so heavily in her chest. Nothing about Ethan Cole felt accidental anymore. Not the way he spoke, not the way he stood, not the way every movement seemed measured to lower panic in one corner of the room while quietly narrowing danger in another. The hostage-taker did not buy the answer, but he did not know what to do with it either. His gaze flicked from Ethan to the front windows, then to Lily in the corner, then back to Ethan again. "You military?" he asked, harsher this time. Ethan shook his head once. Not anymore. It was the first true thing Claire had heard him admit, and somehow it was more unsettling than any lie. Outside, the loudspeaker crackled again, the negotiator's voice muffled by glass and distance. The gunman swore under his breath and yanked the blinds tighter, but the damage was already done. Everyone in the room had heard Ethan's answer. Not anymore. It hung there like smoke. Claire saw it register in the old bank manager's eyes, in the posture of the security guard on the floor, even in the little teller who had stopped crying long enough to stare at Ethan with open disbelief. Lily did not look surprised at all. She only looked scared for her father, which told Claire something almost as important. The child already knew there was more to him than flannel and work boots. The hostage-taker dragged a hand over his face, trying to think, trying to stay in control, but panic was chewing through him faster now. "If you are trying something," he warned, voice thinning, "I swear I will know." Ethan held his gaze with a quiet that felt almost merciful. "If I were trying something," he said, "you would not hear it in my voice." Claire felt the room go still around that sentence. It was not a threat. It was worse for a man like this. It was truth spoken softly. The hostage-taker stared at Ethan, and for one dangerous second Claire thought he might finally understand what kind of man he had chosen to stand in the middle of his disaster. But then another sound broke through the tension, small and frightened and devastating in its timing. Lily whimpered. Just once. A child's thin, shaky sound in a room full of adult fear. Ethan's head turned before he could stop it. It was the first real crack in his composure Claire had seen. Not because he was afraid for himself, but because his daughter had reached the edge of what courage a little girl could carry. The hostage-taker noticed it too, and a cruel kind of relief washed over his face. There it is, Claire thought. He had found the one place Ethan was not armored. "Bring the girl here," the man said suddenly, pointing toward the center of the lobby. Now, Ethan went completely still, and for the first time all morning, Claire saw something in his eyes more dangerous than strategy. She saw a father running out of patience. No, Ethan's answer came so quietly that for a moment it barely sounded like defiance at all. It sounded like a father saying the sky was blue, like something so simple and certain it did not need force behind it. But the room felt it. Claire felt it in the way the hostage-taker's shoulders snapped tight, in the way Lily's little hands clutched the stuffed rabbit closer to her chest, in the way even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum louder over the silence that followed. "You do not get to tell me no," the man barked, stepping toward Ethan with the wild energy of someone who had started to lose control of his own plan. Ethan did not rise to meet him. He did not posture or plead. He only turned his head slightly toward Lily and gave her the smallest nod, a private signal between father and daughter that Claire did not understand but somehow trusted. "She stays where she is," Ethan said. "She is 8 years old. She has done everything you asked." The hostage-taker laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before playing soldier." Claire saw Ethan's jaw tighten again. Just once. The man had guessed enough to be dangerous now, and everyone in the room knew it. Outside, the negotiator's voice rose again through the glass, distant and muffled, asking for calm, asking for time, asking for a conversation that no longer mattered inside these walls. Because the real conversation was happening here, in the 6 feet between a desperate criminal and a kneeling father who had finally reached the edge of what he would tolerate. "Bring her here," the man repeated, louder this time. "Now." Ethan looked at him, and the softness left his face. Not all at once. It simply drained away, like warm light sliding off a field at sunset. What remained was something older, colder. Claire had never seen anything like it in real life. Only in the eyes of men testifying behind closed doors about things they would never fully describe. It was not anger. It was decision. "You do not want to do that," Ethan said. No threat. No raised voice. Just fact. The hostage-taker took one more step, hand lifting as if to grab Ethan by the jacket and force the issue himself. And in that single instant, the room broke open. Claire would later remember it not as violence, but as speed. Ethan moved with the terrifying efficiency of someone who had rehearsed danger for years and hated every second of remembering it. One moment he was kneeling beneath the bank lights, hands empty, shoulders lowered. The next, the gunman stumbled sideways with a cry of surprise, his balance gone, the weapon skidding harmlessly across the tile toward the base of the teller counter. The old bank manager screamed. The little teller gasped. Claire dropped her folder and threw both hands over her mouth. And through it all, Ethan never once looked triumphant. He looked furious only in the way a father looks when fear reaches his child. "Everybody down," he said, his voice suddenly sharp enough to cut through the room like a command no one thought to question. People obeyed before they even realized they were moving. The hostage-taker was disarmed, pinned, and struggling more with shock than with strength, staring up at Ethan as if the truth had arrived too late to save him. Then the front doors burst inward and officers flooded the bank in dark uniforms and winter air, shouting instructions no one inside needed anymore. Because by the time law enforcement reached the center of the lobby, Ethan Cole was already on his feet, already stepping back from the chaos, already turning toward the corner where his daughter stood shaking with tears in her eyes. And the first thing he did after saving every person in that room was kneel in front of Lily and gather her into his arms like nothing else mattered. For a few seconds after the officers rushed in, the bank was nothing but noise. Radios crackled. Boots pounded across tile. Someone was crying near the teller counter, and the old bank manager had both hands over her face as if she still could not believe the room was safe. But at the center of it all, Ethan Cole seemed to hear none of it. He was kneeling on the floor with Lily in his arms, one hand spread protectively over the back of her head, the other rubbing slow circles between her shoulders while she shook against his chest. "It is over," he whispered. "You did so good, baby girl. I have got you." Claire stood a few feet away, her heart still trying to catch up to what she had just seen. Officers were securing the scene, separating witnesses, checking on the elderly man, speaking into shoulder mics with clipped urgency. Yet the strangest thing in the room was not the chaos. It was the way those same officers kept glancing at Ethan. Not casually. Not with the gratitude people offer an ordinary civilian who got lucky. This was different. It was recognition wrapped in disbelief. A gray-haired tactical commander stepped through the broken line of customers and stopped dead when he saw Ethan's face. "Cole?" he said, the name leaving his mouth like it had been pulled from another life. Ethan looked up, still holding Lily, and something unreadable passed between the two men. The commander's posture changed instantly. So did the officers around him. No one said special operations out loud. They did not have to. It was there in the sudden respect, in the way the commander lowered his voice, in the way one younger officer looked at Ethan like he had just recognized a story he had heard in training but never expected to see in a bank lobby in Colorado. "I need a statement," the commander said carefully. Ethan rose with Lily still in his arms and gave a tired shake of his head. "You will get one," he said, "after she is warm and somewhere quiet." That was all. No explanation. No pride. No attempt to control the room he had just saved. Claire felt something tighten in her chest at the sight of it. Not because Ethan had taken down a desperate man in the span of a heartbeat, though that alone would have been enough to make the local news for months. It was because none of that seemed to matter to him now. His daughter did. Her trembling hands did. The stuffed rabbit she had dropped near the brochure rack did. Ethan crossed the lobby, picked it up himself, brushed dust from one bent ear, and handed it back to Lily with the same care a surgeon might use with something fragile and irreplaceable. Claire watched the little girl bury her face against his neck and understood, with sudden painful clarity, that this was the truest thing about him. Not the old tattoo. Not the speed. Not the way trained men looked at him with startled respect. The truest thing was that he had every reason to let someone else take over, and he still knelt down to find a child's toy because his daughter needed the world to feel normal again. When Claire finally stepped closer, Ethan looked at her as if he had almost forgotten she was there. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The question was so simple, so earnest, that it nearly undid her. Claire shook her head, but her voice came out softer than she intended. "No," she said. "Thanks to you." Ethan did not answer right away. He only looked down at Lily, then back at Claire, with the tired eyes of a man who had carried too much for too long and had no interest in being called a hero for it. "Thanks to luck," he said quietly. But Claire knew better now, and judging by the silence that followed him through that shattered bank, so did everyone else. 3 days later, the snow in Cedar Ridge had turned soft and gray at the edges, melting into the gutters beneath a pale afternoon sky. Ethan Cole was in his backyard repairing a crooked section of fence while Lily sat on the back steps in a knit hat and pink mittens, lining up pebbles along the edge of the porch like they were tiny soldiers standing watch. The house was small, the kind of place a man earned one paycheck at a time, with a sagging porch swing, a rusted charcoal grill, and wind chimes that clicked softly every time the mountain breeze shifted. It was quiet in the way only hard-won peace can be quiet. No sirens. No fluorescent lights. No. Strangers staring at old scars they had not earned the right to ask about. Just the sound of a hammer, the smell of pine and cold dirt, and Lily humming under her breath as if the world had finally decided to let her be 8 again. Ethan was tightening the last bolt when he heard tires on gravel. He looked up and saw a dark sedan ease to a stop beside the curb. Claire Bennett stepped out wearing a camel coat and gloves, one hand holding a paper gift bag, the other clutching something small against her chest. For a second, she simply stood there, framed by the weak winter sun, looking at the house as if she was not entirely sure she belonged in the scene. Ethan set the wrench down on the fence post and wiped his hands on his jeans. Lily spotted Claire first. "That is the lady from the bank," she said softly. Claire smiled at her, the kind of careful smile people wear when they know a child has already seen too much. "Hi, Lily." Then she looked at Ethan and lifted the small object in her hand. It was Lily's stuffed rabbit, freshly washed, one bent ear neatly stitched where the seam had split. "I think this belongs to your daughter," Claire said. Ethan stared at the rabbit for half a second longer than necessary, and Claire had the feeling he was not looking at the toy so much as the reason she had come. Lily ran down the steps and took it with both hands, her whole face brightening in a way that made the cold yard feel warmer. "You fixed her," she whispered. Claire crouched to Lily's height. "I had a little help from a sewing kit and a lot of luck." Ethan let out the faintest breath that might have been a laugh if his life had allowed him more practice. "You did not have to drive all the way out here for that," he said. Claire rose, brushing a strand of blonde hair behind her ear as the wind lifted it loose again. "Maybe not," she answered. "But I wanted to make sure she got it back." The words were simple, but the silence beneath them was not. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, as if trying to decide whether she had come out of gratitude, curiosity, or something quieter and harder to name. Claire met his gaze without flinching. She had seen polished men with polished resumes spend entire careers building the illusion of strength. Ethan, standing in a backyard with cold hands and a socket wrench, had done the opposite. He had hidden strength so completely it only appeared when kindness had no other choice left. "The commander at the bank told me who you used to be," Claire said at last. Ethan's expression did not harden, but something in him retreated, just a step. "That was a long time ago." Claire nodded. "I figured that was the point." Lily, already hugging the rabbit to her coat, wandered back toward the porch humming again, leaving the two adults in the soft rattle of wind chimes and distant traffic. Ethan rested one hand on the fence post and looked out over the yard. The mountains beyond town washed pale with snow. "Most people hear that kind of story and start asking questions," he said. "You brought back a rabbit." Claire smiled, but there was something gentle in it now, something stripped of courtroom polish and city certainty. "I thought your daughter needed her rabbit more than I needed answers." For the first time since she had met him, Ethan looked caught off guard. Not by danger, by grace. He glanced toward Lily, then back at Claire, and the guarded distance in his face eased just enough to let warmth through. "Would you like some coffee?" he asked. It was not dramatic. It was not a grand reward for survival or a perfect movie ending. It was better than that. It was a tired single father standing in a backyard, offering the smallest piece of his ordinary life to the woman who had seen the worst day of it and stayed gentle anyway. Claire looked past him at the little house, the patched fence, the child on the porch, and the man who had once been trained for war but now measured his victories in repaired toys and quiet mornings. "Yes," she said softly, "I would." And as Ethan held the back door open for her, Cedar Ridge seemed to settle into a deeper kind of silence than fear had ever managed to create. It was the silence that comes after truth has done its work, after danger has passed, after a man who never asked to be seen is finally met by someone who understands that the most powerful thing about him was never what he could do in a crisis. It was the quiet life he kept choosing after it.